an honor to welcome the inspirational figure of Her Majesty, the Queen Mother of Bhutan, Ashi Dorji Wangmo Wangchuck, untiring philanthropist, patron of the arts, author of 3 important books, Treasures of the Thunder Dragon, of Rainbows and Clouds, and a book on Drukyul. She has just been honored by having the declaration of this being her special day. So I think a very big clap for her to begin with.
Thank you so much, Namita. I am truly humbled. I feel so loved here. And this is a connection that I will take with me for the rest of my life. I hope to be an honorary Boulder one day.
So clearly there's some karmic connection unfolding here. But I have a bit of a problem with the conversation now. The problem being that I cherish such a deep friendship, and I've had such long conversations with her, that in the questions I ask her, there may be some gaps, as they are when 2 people who are old friends are talking. But I'm trying to keep all of you informed of the backstories of the questions as well, so that the conversation gains more meaning. So please bear with me on that. Otherwise, it shouldn't just become like a private chat. It should be a chat that includes all of us here in the conversation. We will begin with your book, Your Majesty, The Treasures of the Thunder Dragon, where you speak of Bhutan in terms of family and national history, in terms of culture and society. And so I'd like you to tell us about the book, about the stories that went into the making of the book, and perhaps read a short or a longish passage, whichever you feel like, from the book, because I think there's no better way to enter the mind of Her Majesty than through this book, which, can we show them this book is available outside in the bookstore, and if we are lucky, we can get her to sign some copies for you. So, and also there was another question here I wanted to add, was if you can also tell us what the dragon represents for you, because the dragon, it is the title of the book, and it refers to your beloved country and culture, so, and then the passage from the book.
The dragon is the symbol that's on the flag of Bhutan. My country may be known as Bhutan to the outside world, but at home, it is called the land of the dragon. Now, when my children were being educated in the United States of America, in high schools, I had time on my hands to travel into the very remote areas of my country. Some of these journeys took me 21 days on foot, and I went and I spent a lot of time in these very remote areas and experienced the lives of our villagers who were living actually in isolation. And there are so many stories. The treasures, these are the treasures, because I've met so many special people there. And because of these journeys, and I kept a journal, so this book came about.
I think I know that Her Majesty is hesitant about the passage because it's a very deep and private passage into her inner landscape of her mind, and indeed of her past and present, perhaps. So I think you'll all enjoy this story, and I think you should read it to us.
Well, I warn you, believe it or not. When I was in my late 30s, I began to have a recurrent dream from which I would wake up with the lingering sadness often finding my face wet with tears. Each time I would wonder why I was having this dream. My dream featured a big 3-storied traditional Bhutanese house with a large balcony and a sleeping toddler strapped to her back. Actually, can I just read this again? I dreamt of a slender, rather tall woman, perhaps in her late 20s, who would be standing on the balcony with a sleeping toddler strapped to her back. The woman wore a kira, and that is the national dress, fastened at the shoulders by a pair of silver koma, and that is the traditional brooch, of a rather old-fashioned design. She had a haunting expression of sadness and yearning on her face, as though she was waiting for someone to return. Behind her on the porch sat 2 women weaving on the backstrap loom. The house had a courtyard with young orange trees laden with ripe fruit. At this point, the dream would end. After this dream reoccurred several times, I began to feel that I was the woman in the dreams. I even experienced her emotions and grief, and in my dream, I could feel the child's breath and warmth on me as if I was the one carrying it. Excuse me, straighten this. One day, I described the house of my dreams with its walled courtyard full of orange trees to my father. I asked him if he knew of any house that fitted this description in the orange-growing regions of Bhutan. Is the house in your dreams painted or unpainted? Asked my father. Painted, I replied. Then the house is Shenga Shinchum, my father said. I have been there and it fits your description exactly. But I didn't believe the house from my dreams really existed. Months passed. I continued to have the same dream. Then one day in 1993, when I was 38, I decided on an impulse to go to the house in Shenga Shinchum. The house was far beyond Pinakajong, across the Pochu River. I walked through paddy fields for quite some time, and before the house came into view, partial view in the distance, I saw a nun. An uncanny feeling of déjà vu came over me. The house was identical to the one in my dreams. Behind the house stood this lady, the nun, and I asked her, have we met before? Haven't we met before? I feel as if I've met you before. And she said, no, we've never met. And then she invited me to her house for tea. She had been born in that house, she told me, and now lived there with her son's family. She had become a nun after she was widowed, which is not uncommon in Bhutan. As we climbed up to the second floor, I looked out of a window and saw a courtyard with just 2 gnarled old orange trees with only a few shriveled fruit on them. The wall around the courtyard had crumbled. Just bits remained intact at the corners, the rest strewn around as debris of mud and stone. A feeling of gloom overwhelmed me. My daughter, Sonam Dichen, who was with me, asked me what was wrong. It's the orange tree courtyard from my dreams. Now it has become such a desolate ruin, I whispered to her. The nun who had gone to bring us refreshments now came back with buttered tea and saffron rice. I sat silently, trying to compose myself and wondering whether I should take my quest further. Finally, I couldn't resist asking her, did the mother of a little child in this house die young? Her answer was prompt. My mother died when she was 31, when I was 3 years old. This fitted in with the ages of the mother and the child in my dreams. I asked her how her mother had died. Her mother had died. She had died of smallpox, a killer in Bhutan in those days. The nun told me she remembered that her mother's body had been exhumed and cremated a year after her death, as it was believed that the cremation of smallpox victims might spread the disease and infection. All this happened more than 50 years ago. Could it be that the child I carried on my back in my dreams was now living here right in this house? I didn't say anything anymore to the nun, but asked her to show me other rooms in the house. I met her granddaughters, bright and pretty girls, and I saw the covered balcony on the second floor, so familiar from my dreams. There were no weavers there now, but I saw the holes that had held the fixtures of their backstrap looms. The nun told me that in our childhood, that was where the weavers would work. There was just one detail that was different. The balcony railings were of a different design from the ones in my dream. As though reading my mind, the nun volunteered the information that the old railings had been replaced some years earlier. Finally, I went to the third floor of the altar room with its images and scriptures. I prostrated 3 times before the altar and returned to leave when I saw a pair of old brass binoculars lying on the windowsill. I picked up the binoculars to see what they had in their sights, and I got a sharp jolt. For there, clearly visible, across the river and high on a hill, was Nopka, the village where I was born. I bid farewell to the family of my past life, if indeed that was who they were, without telling them anything about my dreams. The dreams ceased from that very night. I have not gone back to Shengashinchum, nor have I met anyone from that family again. But the questions still remain. Did the sad-faced woman in my dreams pray to be reborn in the beautiful hamlet of Nopka that faced her village and her house? And was she indeed reborn in Nopka some 20 years after her death from smallpox? And is that how I came to be the mother of a woman who was now 20 years older than me and had grown-up grandchildren? Or could it be that my recurrent dreams were fueled by memories buried in my subconsciousness? Could the amazing resemblance between what I saw in my dream and what I discovered at the house in Shangana just be a series of rare coincidences? I still don't know what to make of my intriguing experience, which defies any logical or rational explanation. But I leave it to my readers to interpret it for themselves.
So, thank you for sharing such a deep, intense, personal set of memories. And all of us have had these feelings. I could sense in the audience the sense of recognition we all felt with connections we carry, which we don't often recognize, or sometimes don't have the courage to recognize. I want to move now to the great nation, great state, the culture of Bhutan. Bhutan is an ancient kingdom, but it's also the youngest democracy in the world. And that transition has been made with mindfulness and with deep thought. So on that basis, I the person who, all those who know Bhutan deeply respect and appreciate the transformational role of the fourth king, His Majesty Jigme Singye Wangchuck, whose reign of 34 years laid the foundations for a state sensitive to environmental and social issues and to the concept of gross national happiness. He brought in democracy. He was the most beloved king, but he brought in democracy which was resisted by his people, and he has been one of the most enlightened rulers anywhere. So do tell us about the fourth king, the respected fourth king of Bhutan.
The fourth king of Bhutan, His Majesty Jigme Singye Wangchuck, came to the throne when his father died, and he was just 16 years old. Soon as he came to the throne, in his coronation speech, he spoke about our country having to be self-reliant. He spoke about the importance of preserving our environment. Now, I have to tell you, that was in 1972 coronation. Official coronation was in 74. And I'm sure all of you will agree with me that the green word was not in vogue then. So, he set about his duty to serve the nation. Bhutan in those days was very different from the Bhutan of today. Tourism started in 1974 with just 200 visitors, and most of them were the coronation guests. Now, His Majesty is, I'm not saying this because he's my husband, and I need to praise my husband, but I'm saying this because he is my king, the king of Bhutan. He was the king of Bhutan. He is a man with a vision which very few leaders of the world have. And he put that vision into life. And we are the recipients now of his vision. We have an environment in our country which is, the country is 75% under forest cover. And by constitution, 60% of our country will forever remain under forest cover. Now, Bhutan is very rich in its biodiversity because we respect and we protect our environment, our flora, fauna. Now, coming to democracy, His Majesty was a very, very beloved king. Why? Because, first of all, he's actually a kind of person who never wanted to be king, right? Because his father died, he became king. And he felt that the nation under one man was not so safe. Because there would be good kings and there could be bad kings. And during that time, our country was an absolute monarchy. His Majesty wanted democracy for Bhutan. And very early on in his reign, he started the process of decentralizing the power from the center to the districts and then to the villages. And finally, some 30 years later, in 2008, the Constitution of Bhutan came into existence. And His Majesty is the author of the Constitution. Now let me tell you something which is quite interesting in the Constitution. When the king has to retire at the age of 65, and all constitutional post holders also have to retire at the age of 65. When I accompanied His Majesty to many of our districts, where His Majesty tried to explain the Constitution to the people they begged him, they cried, and they said that we want only you to guide us. We want only you to guide us because we can only trust you to guide us. You are our father. So His Majesty used to listen very patiently to one member of each household of each district attended the constitutional awareness education meetings, public meetings. So His Majesty would listen very carefully to them and explain to them that every 5 years they can elect a leader, and if they're not satisfied with their work, they can always elect another. And he said, if you're not ready now, you never will be. Because most constitutions in the world are actually formed when there's a lot of strife, and therefore the best is never put into the constitution. So our constitution is very unique and very, let's say, workable. And now we have a vibrant democracy in our country, and we are about, we'll have a third elections in 2018. So in that, His Majesty gave up his absolute power and handed the power to the people against their wishes. So that's one thing that I wanted to share with you about His Majesty.
Indeed, so almost mystical is the nature of this great king, that he lives in a log hut.
He lives in a log cabin. He lives in a log cabin in a pine forest. And he lives a very austere life, very few ones. And he loves cycling. And I wish I could bring him to Boulder, because your cycling roads up to the beautiful mountains would be just fantastic.
I think at the festival next year. So, Your Majesty, to go on with the very intense and deep heritage of the family, I want to speak about your grandson, the little Rinpoche, who has been declared an incarnation of Vairochana, who was the great translator of Tibet. And I had the joy of meeting him this year in Mountain Echoes, and indeed being blessed by his calm and very charming presence. And so, you know, every country, every culture has its own ways of approaching things. And to many in the audience, it may sound familiar or unfamiliar. As an Indian, not as a Bhutanese, as a Hindu, not as a Buddhist, it sounds to me a completely normal and workable thing. But at the same time, there is so much joy associated with this. I would love you to share some of the stories of this continuity of tradition that is happening with his being declared the little Rinpoche.
After my boring reading about my own possible reincarnation, are you ready for another one? Well, my daughter had a son, older son, 6 years old. And her second is 3 years old now, and he's the reincarnate. Now, what made us come to the conclusion that he was a reincarnate is something which defies logic. Soon as the little one was born, he would start making, we call it the mudras. Do you understand? Yes, most of you understand what a mudra is. Yes, the hand postures. And he would make the hand postures that of Virochana. Now, Virochana lived a long, long time ago. I can't imagine why he came back. He lived in the 8th century. So he was one of the greatest masters, greatest translators ever. So he would make the mudra, the hand gesture of Virochana. And at that time, we didn't know. I had never heard of, I'm really ignorant, I had never heard of Virochana before. And he would make these hand gestures, and my daughter went online, and she checked what he was doing. And that's when we discovered that they were the mudra of Virochana. And soon as he was able to speak, he used to recite prayers in Sanskrit. And we didn't know what he was saying. We didn't know what he was saying. Again, we had to do research to find out the meaning of his prayers. And those prayers in Sanskrit translated as peace of the mind, for everyone to have peace, and there to be peace in the world. And we were baffled because we just couldn't imagine having a little reincarnate in the family. And we were really, really puzzled. We didn't know how to react, what to do. And the defining moment came when he actually, in the presence of my father and my father's older brother, both of them in their 90s, and his mother and I, he put this finger on his nose, and he said, I am Virochana, I am Virochana, I am Virochana, thrice. And now there are many, many stories of what he did and what he has said, but not a moment passes before every time he surprises us, he baffles us. So now all this happened, what I'm telling you, all happened before he was 2 years old. And then we had no choice but to consult with our G. Khenpo, and he is the religious head of Bhutan. So we consulted with His Holiness, and we decided then to ordain him as a monk. And in a ceremony in our Punakadzong, he was inducted as a monk. And in the presence of 500 monks in a great hall, he did his prostrations, he did his 9 prostrations and all the formal etiquette required of a much, much, much older monk. Because I have to tell you that he is the youngest ever to be ordained as a monk of our central monastic order, and the first from the royal family of Bhutan to also become a monk. Now he's 3, and I hope he will come to Boulder one day, because this is a place where I find such good energy and spirituality here. I hope he comes here one day, and I hope I live long enough to come with him.
On that note, on that strange and wondrous story, I would like to have you discuss what spirituality and Buddhist practice means to you.
Spirituality is something that we in Bhutan practice on a daily basis. For me, spirituality is something that calms you, grounds you. And in Bhutan, we are a very spiritual country. We have certain, we call them pujas or kurims. We do that on a daily basis. We say our prayers on a daily basis. We have the sacred zongs and our temples where everybody goes. Say, for instance, we have a temple called Jaipur in Thimphu, and that is the abode of the local deity. And before every examination, you can see queues of students asking for his blessings. And they feel spiritually enhanced and comforted. God knows what the results would be, though.
And if all of you feel that this is going too deep into mysticism and spirituality, I must remember that once in a session in Jaipur, you also mentioned a much less spiritual hero of your childhood.
I know who you're going to talk about.
So are you going to talk about that? Or do you want to skip that one?
Well, I think I might as well share this with everybody. That fellow is none other than old Mr. Blue Suede Shoes, Elvis.
So, as I said, Her Majesty is full of surprises, and long-standing Elvis fan, But what I want to move to is that it is evident from your books and conversations that you have observed a huge degree of change in your life, in your country, in your constitution, in the way you live. I've been watching it. I've been coming to Bhutan for about 18 years now, and every year something changes, but yet a lot remains the same. And from the Buddhist point of view also of change, I want you to speak of what do you think is the nature of change?
Change is the only constant in our lives. Now, what is important is to prepare for that change, and be mindful of that change. For me personally, in the course of my life, I was born in a village in Punaka, Nobga to be exact, and I had the most wonderful childhood. I milked cows and gathered firewood for the family and helped with the washing. And I wasn't a good cook. I couldn't do that. That was my older sister's job. But I really enjoyed my childhood in the village. We had no electricity, no communication whatsoever, none. And to talk about that, now in Bhutan, we have a population of 660,000, to be exact. And all of them own mobile phones. But in those days, we didn't know, in those days, the days of my childhood, we didn't know what was happening in the other village. And to find out, we had to walk great distances. And as a matter of fact, when I first went to school, I went riding on the family horses. And then I encountered my first car. And they were the first cars that had come into Bhutan. And it was a Jeep. And it smelled so bad. It really smelled bad. The petrol made me sick. And my father had to give us the peels of orange to put on our nose, you know. And it took us a long time. That was the first time we actually saw the car, and that was for me, that was in 1963. In 63. And there are many stories about local villagers having seen a big vehicle for the first time and thinking it was an animal and taking grass to feed it. So we have come a long, long way, a very long way. And now we have our own national airline, the Drukyul. It's called the Drukyul. It's the Dragonair. So we have a national airline. Our villages are now well connected. So it's a wonderful change.
And it's a well-off economy with hydropower, but I was more interested in also what you mentioned earlier about change being the only constant. I mean, I'm asking this not on behalf of the audience alone, but on my own behalf. What is the secret of coping with change, according to you? Many of us are afraid of change. I'm afraid of change. Even small changes terrify some of us.
Namita. Namita, change happens to all of us, even physically, starting physically. Can you imagine, we are in our diapers, and we're changing, and look at me now, I look so ancient. So change is constant. We have to accept that, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, for the better, of course, I hope, whether it's in your living condition. Change is happening all over the world, and we're going to see more changes. And like I said earlier, we have to be mindful and prepared for it.
Well, so, Your Majesty, in this process of change and modernization, one of the things you have done very mindfully with a great deal of dedication is preserving a lot of the art, the culture, the cultural practices, architecture of your country. There's one of the most beautiful, I would not call it a monument, but it's like a living museum of Dochula, which you have put up. So I'd like you to tell about these ways of preserving cultural identities that you have done across the years.
I think this is the influence that I got from my father. My father spends all his money and his energy in building temples and stupas all over Bhutan. And he is right now 91 years old, and he's still working to build one of the biggest stupas in Bhutan. He's still working, and he spends all his money towards these causes. Now, personally for myself, in 2003, I built a cluster of 108 stupas at a pass called Dochula, but there was a reason why I did it. And that reason was His Majesty the Fourth King, at that time, went to war. Now, this war, we call it, the last war that Bhutan that Bhutan fought was in two wars, in 1864 and 1865. And since then, of course, we had no wars. But we had to do this because of the fact that there were militants encamped on our borders, and they were from India, but then they were fighting against India for autonomy, for statehood, and all diplomatic channels were exhausted, and there was no option but to get rid of them militarily. So His Majesty, the fourth king, he led his men into battle, 3,000 men, 3,000 Bhutanese soldiers, led by His Majesty at the front. And now there were over 3,000 militants encamped in very strategic spots along the border. There were many camps, 15 camps. And so His Majesty went to war, and when he was going to war, my son went along with His Majesty too. He trained as a militia. And at that time, he was studying in Oxford, but then he took time off to accompany his father into battle. And he was 19 at that time. So, when His Majesty went down to the south to fight this war, we were in a state of panic back home. And so then I decided that I would like to negotiate with all the spirits or all the good forces, and that I would build 108 stupas and start building 108 stupas for the safe return of His Majesty and our men, of course, and my son. So I built, and now I must say it has become a landmark. And oh, by the way, His Majesty went, and in 36 hours, it was over. Unfortunate, and we were victorious because all of them they had left. Of course, I mean, in battle, there are deaths. And we lost 11 of our soldiers, very unfortunately. Then we lit butter lamps for all the ones who had perished, including, obviously, the militants. Human life is so precious. And after that, I built a temple above the 108 stupas. It's a very beautiful place. If you ever come to Bhutan, you must experience it. And that temple was, I devoted that to His Majesty, the fourth king, to thank him for what he had done for his people, to honor him and to thank him. And likewise, now when you're talking about culture, I also established a folk heritage museum, which is very important, I think, because folk heritage is a part of our lives. It's really the soul of the Bhutanese people. So that has been established in the capital city. And talking about mountain echoes, do you want to talk about mountain echoes? Okay. Mountain Echoes is Bhutan's literature festival. It's held in August every year. We just completed our 7th edition, and it was really, really successful. Successful in the sense that it has made the young people want to read and not spend all their time on their phones or their iPads, and to appreciate the ones who give us the gifts, like all of you, through your pens and from your bright minds. So the Bhutanese authors this year outnumbered the Indian authors as well as the international authors. And it's a huge feat because writing in English for Bhutan started only 20 years ago. Only 20 years ago. Till then, most of our writing was done in our own language called Dzongkha. And the Mountain Echoes, the name, was coined by none other than this lady here.
And of course, it is a multilingual festival, and Dzongkha, the official language, is very much a part of it. Again, I request any of you who happen to want to, I'm sure many of you will be inspired to visit Bhutan after this scintillating talk, but it is in August every year. We've just finished our edition, and it's a way to understand the many layers of Bhutanese reality and the splendors of Himalayan culture. Now, before we close, because I think we are running short of time, I want you to talk about all the things that have inspired you, but also to compress that into another question, what has inspired you in Boulder? Because I have watched you here feel this deep connection with the place and with the people. So if you could talk about Boulder and about the other things that have lit up your life and ignited you to do new and wonderful things.
First of all, I think all of you will guess. The one person who has inspired me all my life is none other than His Majesty, Jigme Singye Wangchuck, the fourth king of Bhutan, the father of gross national happiness. And the littlest one now who inspires me is none other than the little monk that I spoke to you about. And Boulder. I have fallen in love with Boulder. I really have. I really have. Soon as I got here, I took a drive up to the mountains, past the flat irons, and I stood on a rock with Jessie, Peggy, and some of my friends. We sat there with the wind blowing our hair, and I looked down at your Boulder. It reminded me of home. I felt a sense of deep connection with Boulder. And after that, having met so many of the Boulderans, even on the streets, in the shops, they open their hearts, they have this wonderful smile. And the thing is, not the smile when you smile with your lips, but they smile with their eyes. So, this is it. It's my second home.
We don't really have time for questions today. We were running a little tight, but I'm sure there are many answered and unanswered questions in the course of this conversation today. I personally am moved to see some of my worlds colliding here. I always consider Bhutan a part of my second home. I love Boulder. To see Boulder and Bhutan meet with some of India and with friends from across the world, I'm feeling incredibly connected in so many ways. Thank you, Your Majesty, for giving us a session where these connections became clearer, brighter, more beautiful. And wishing all of you wonderful sessions ahead, where you are spoiled for choice who to listen to. And a very big clap for Boulder and for Bhutan.